In this video, I will give a brief overview of some of the main tenets of scientific writing that I am looking for when I read your essays. Not only is this important when you write scientifically, but it's important for communicating clearly to people in your workplace, to friends and family via email, and any other time you're really just writing out your thoughts and trying to articulate your thoughts, explain your thoughts clearly to anyone in your life. Fundamentally, writing is a craft and it takes practice to do it well. What I like to think about is my personal experience with basketball. The first time I played basketball, I had no idea what to do with the ball. But eventually, after years and years of practicing and playing through junior high school, and then through college, I became proficient at various skills and techniques for manipulating the basketball and to play the sport. I know many of you probably have hobbies, whether it be playing music or riding some kind of skateboard or bicycle or swimming or knitting, sewing, carpentry, anything that you do in your spare time for pleasure, you'll know takes practice. And the more you practice, whatever that is, the better you get at it. This class will give you an opportunity to practice your writing and get feedback from peers and the instructor, and also to research environmental science topics. When we write for others, we do best when we communicate clearly and concisely, meaning that we use words that are only interpreted in one way. Anytime a word is used, there are connotations that are associated with those words. That means when I say hot dog, you have a certain feeling. You may love hot dogs, you may hate hot dogs. Whatever it is, there's a connotation with that. And it's very important that we choose our words carefully so that when we use them, they cannot be misinterpreted in our writing. For instance, in this example, the pursuit of resources is often the cause of deforestation. Sounds like a fine sentence to me. Sure it is. But if we really nitpick the words in this sentence, what does pursuit mean? Think about that for a second. What does the word pursuit actually connotate? The word pursuit has to do with going after, chasing. Those are the words that come to my mind first of all. And it's not necessarily going after or chasing resources that cause deforestation. It's actually the acquisition of those resources that leads to deforestation. So you can see here how to reword this sentence so that you don't accidentally misinform your reader. Word choice and wordsmithing is a major part of what we will practice in this class. Another tenet of scientific writing is not to exaggerate or embellish. Let's look at this sentence. The use of CFCs is always destructive of the ozone. How can we fix it? What's wrong with it? Well, destructive, always destructive, two words that have strong connotations. Always means every time. Destructive means obliteration, to wipe out. Now, that's not the exact case with CFCs. A more accurate rephrasing of this sentence would say something like this. CFCs have the potential to reduce the ozone concentration. In this way, we are accurately articulating our concepts, and we are not leading the reader to a specific feeling or emotional reaction. Destruction is usually a bad thing, right? And when you use this concept of CFCs reducing ozone and say destructive, you're using emotional rhetoric. And scientific writing in this course tries to be as data-driven and based on facts to persuade readers rather than to rely on emotional words that can bring up specific feelings for the reader. This goes back to really what are the tenets of science? And the tenets of science are objective reasoning, not subjective reasoning, meaning we don't include our emotions about what the temperature is outside. We ask the object of the mercury in the thermometer to measure the quantity of change of the volume of that mercury, and that tells us whether the temperature is 95 degrees, 96 degrees, 97 degrees, or in the case of Chico sometimes 105 degrees. Whether it's hot or not is how we feel about it. And that's not what we're interested in here. I'm not interested in how you feel about CFCs and the ozone layer. I'm interested in what can actually be proven through objective, source verifiable information. When you start to review your rough draft, one of the things that I want you to pay close attention to is your thesis sentence. In this class, that for our purposes, the first sentence in every paragraph of your paper is considered your thesis for that paragraph. And all other sentences within the following paragraph should help to support the paragraph's thesis. If they do not, then they do not belong in that paragraph and potentially should be removed, or you need to modify your thesis so your thesis is directly related to those sentences in your paragraph. Let's give an example here of an introductory thesis sentence. The introduction should present only the material to be reviewed in the body of the paper. So, the format for the paper is introduction, body, conclusion, and it's very important that your introduction should present only material that should be reviewed in the body of the paper. If we read this introduction written by a student in a previous GEOS 330 course, we would expect there to be no sentences which are not expanded on later on in the paper. So take a moment to read this paragraph and quickly jot down what you expect to be expanded on in the body of the paper. So the first sentence starts, deforestation has been a man-made problem since the human species first began to settle. What that means is if this is the very first sentence of your paper, you're drawing attention to the reader to a couple of different topics. One, the topic of deforestation. Two, man-made problems. And three, human species settling. If your paper does not include all three of those concepts that are going to be elaborated on further in the body of your paper, they do not belong. This paper ended up being only about deforestation and how it was a man-made problem. It did not expand on how it was related to the settlement of human beings. So in this case, this part of the sentence is a wasted attempt to try to focus the reader and should be removed. It's actually distracting. So to say deforestation has been a man-made problem is about all you need, or deforestation is a man-made problem. Now, I would articulate it in a different fashion, but if that's the gist of it, then that's the main concept that needs to be put down. The need for timber and resources below the Earth's surface led to the destruction of vast forests. Let's look at this sentence. Now, here we're actually getting into what resources are actually leading to the destruction of vast forests. And you would expect that if this is the second sentence in your introduction, that in some paragraph in the body of your paper, you will expand on the need for timber and resources and how it leads to the destruction of vast forests. Not only is the loss of forest a tragedy, this is emotional rhetoric and should be removed, the repercussions can also be quite degrading to the environment. This sentence cues the reader into thinking that, okay, there's a repercussion to deforestation, and somehow it degrades the environment. Degrading the environment is a very broad term. When I read this, I think, well, what about the environment is being degraded? Be specific whenever possible. Deforestation can cause a string of problems such as increased carbon dioxide emissions, climate change, and loss of biodiversity. Many of you are probably used to leaving your thesis for the very last sentence in your introduction. In my case, the entire introduction should be a preparation for the reader of what is about to come in the rest of the paper. In this case, deforestation can cause a string of problems such as increased carbon dioxide emissions, climate change, and loss of biodiversity. To me, can be included in this previous sentence. Not only is the loss of forest a tragedy, the repercussions can also be quite degrading to the environment. How can they be degrading to the environment? The repercussions can cause a string of problems such as increased carbon dioxide emissions, climate change, and loss of biodiversity. Not only is the loss of forest a tragedy, no, let's get rid of that. That's emotional rhetoric. Deforestation can cause a string of problems such as increased carbon dioxide emissions, climate change, and loss of biodiversity. Okay, let's read this whole paragraph again and think about what it's saying and what it's preparing the reader for. Deforestation is a man-made problem. The need for timber and resources below the Earth's surface led to the destruction of vast forests. Deforestation can cause a string of problems such as increased carbon dioxide emissions, climate change, and loss of biodiversity. Good. This paragraph is now clearer, it's more concise, and it's leading the reader into a paper which will be about man-made or anthropogenic deforestation, the loss of forests as a result of access to timber and mineral deposits in the ground, and how those can result in environmental degradation such as environmental carbon emissions, climate change, and a loss of biodiversity. If in fact this paper goes over all of those things, it's going to be a very long paper. These are a lot of very big topics, and I would encourage all of you to really focus on one aspect of this. These papers are not long research papers, and I would rather have you working on explaining things thoroughly than skimming over a bunch of various topics. And so I would recommend in this case that the writer focus on one of these rather than all three. Carbon dioxide emissions and climate change are very similar. So let's focus on either that or let's focus on the loss of biodiversity. I would say in this case we'll reduce it to just the loss of biodiversity rather than carbon dioxide emissions and climate change. So deforestation can cause a loss of biodiversity, and it would be even better if you could explain which type of biodiversity is being lost. For instance, in the Amazon rainforest. So what was a wordy, vague paragraph has taken on a much clearer and more concise introduction for a paper which will be limited in its range of discussions, focused on one concept and working to articulate that concept or to explain that concept in simple terms that anybody who picks up this paper who is in college would be able to read it and to understand what you're talking about. This is how I read your essays when it comes time to grading, and I will go through and give you feedback on your paragraph structure, your thesis sentences, and the flow of coherency within each paragraph, as well as between paragraphs. In terms of quoted material, you should always quote word for word and enclose those quotes in quotation marks, followed by a citation. Here's an example. Wind is the world's fastest growing electric energy source, according to Archer and Jacobson, 2007. This is how you would include a quote and the necessary citation. No more than 3% of the text can be direct quotes, and quotes should be no longer than 5 words in length. In fact, I would prefer that you use no quotes and articulate everything in your own words. That's it for Research Essay 1, General Structure Overview.